There are women who leave, who pack their bags, who cry loudly, who call their families, who fight back. And then there are women like Ngozi, who stay, who smile, who cook, who pray, who endure, until the day they decide that enduring is over. After 12 years of loyalty, after 12 years of waking up before the sun, after 12 years of making herself smaller so he could feel larger, the man Ngozi had carried from nothing sat across from her at the dinner table and said words no faithful wife should ever have to hear. Not "I am sorry," not "thank you," not even "you have stood by me through everything." Instead, he looked at the same woman who had once borrowed money to keep his business running, the same woman who had defended him when his own family doubted him, the same woman who had given 12 years of her mornings, her prayers, and her silence. And he said, "I want you to move to the boys' quarters. I am bringing another woman into this house." But that was not even the worst part. What he said next, what he used to justify it, would break the heart of any woman watching this, because when Ngozi asked why, Emeka looked at his wife and said, "You are no longer what I need." That night the house was full of silence, but behind that silence, something had already begun. And when Ngozi finally responded, nobody in that compound saw it coming, not his family, not his friends, not even Ngozi herself. Because instead of fighting, instead of screaming, instead of walking away, she said one word, "Okay." But what nobody knew was that Ngozi's silence was not surrender. It was the beginning of something far more powerful. Stay with me until the very end. Because what Ngozi does next will change everything. In the city of Lagos, where beautiful houses stand behind tall gates and expensive cars hide painful secrets, there lived a woman named Ngozi Adeyemi. To the outside world, Ngozi looked like a woman who had everything: a comfortable home in a good estate, a husband with a growing business, a life that many women quietly wished for. But people often forget something important. A comfortable house can still be a prison. A successful husband can still be a wound, and a smiling family photo can still be a lie. Because behind the polished floors and well-kept curtains of that house, Ngozi had been quietly disappearing for years. She was not just Emeka's wife, she was the woman who had built him. Before the business, before the contracts, before people started greeting him with respect at events, there was only one person standing beside him, Ngozi. And if life were fair, that should have meant something. But sometimes in this world, the people who build you are the first people you forget when success finally comes. Ngozi came from a hard-working family. Her father had been a civil servant. Her mother had run a small provision store in their neighborhood. They were not wealthy, but they were disciplined. Her mother had raised her with a specific philosophy. You do not give up on the people you love just because things become difficult. Difficulty is where loyalty proves itself. Ngozi had absorbed that teaching completely, perhaps too completely. Before Emeka, there had been a different Ngozi. A Ngozi who laughed too loud at things that were genuinely funny, who had opinions about things and shared them freely without calculating first whether they would cause trouble, who had a circle of friends she called without checking the time, who had plans for her own life, her own career, her own goals, her own direction. That Ngozi had existed. She had simply been replaced gradually, so slowly that even Ngozi herself had not noticed the replacement happening until the day she looked in the mirror and realized she no longer recognized the woman looking back at her. She had met Emeka at her cousin's graduation party. He was charming in the specific way that comes from confidence and genuine attention. He was not the best-dressed man in the room. He was not the most important. But he was the most present. He noticed her from across the room and came directly to where she was standing. "No hesitation, no pretense," he said. "I have been trying to think of a reason to come and talk to you for the last 20 minutes. I could not find a good enough one, so I decided to come anyway." She had laughed. A real laugh. Not the careful, measured laugh she would later learn to perform. A real one that surprised even her. He smiled at her, like he had found something he had been quietly looking for without knowing it. They talked for 3 hours that night, about everything and nothing, about where they had grown up, about what they had wanted to be when they were children, about the things they still believed in and the things they had stopped believing in. By the end of the evening, Ngozi had given him her number. Not because she was looking for someone, but because the conversation had felt like a door she did not want to close. They dated for 2 years. In those 2 years, Emeka was everything she had been told a good man should be: present, attentive, thoughtful, with small details. He called when he said he would call. He showed up when he said he would show up. He remembered small things she mentioned in passing: her mother's birthday, the name of her childhood best friend, the book she had been meaning to read for years. One day, without any announcement, he showed up at her office with the book. She had mentioned it once in passing 3 months earlier. He had remembered. That was the kind of man he was in those years. Or at least, that was the kind of man he appeared to be. She was 28 years old when he proposed. Down on one knee at a small restaurant where they had gone for her birthday. No big announcement, no crowd watching. Just the two of them, and a ring that was modest but meaningful. She had said yes immediately. Not because she felt she had to, because she genuinely believed she had found the person she wanted to build her life with. She had no idea that the man proposing was already slightly different from the man she had met at that graduation party, and that the man she would be living with in 5 years would be different again. They married in a simple traditional ceremony. No luxury hall, no famous MC, no grand convoy, just family, prayer, rice, laughter, and hope. Her mother had cried during the ceremony, not from sadness, from the specific emotion of watching a daughter step into something that will ask everything of her. Mothers know things. Their first home was a rented flat in Surulere, modest, clean, theirs. Emeka had just started a small logistics business. It was not making money yet. Ngozi was working as an accountant at a mid-sized company. Her salary was steady. His income was not. In the first year, she paid 3 months of rent alone without telling anyone. Not even her mother. She did not want people to think Emeka could not provide. She protected his dignity the way you protect something fragile. Carefully, without drawing attention to how hard you are holding it. When Emeka's business needed a new truck, she combined her savings with a loan she took quietly from her bank. She signed her own name on the loan documents, not his, because his credit was not yet established. When a major client nearly ended the business over an unpaid invoice, she sat with him until midnight, 3 nights in a row, going through the accounts and finding a solution. She never counted these things. She never brought them up in arguments. She never added them up and presented them as evidence of her sacrifice, because she did not see them as sacrifices at the time. She saw them as love. She was the kind of wife many men pray for but very few know how to value. And slowly, the business grew. The single truck became 2, 2 became 5. The small logistics business became a proper company. Emeka began winning government contracts, then private sector contracts, then international partnerships. By year 7 of their marriage, Emeka was no longer just Emeka. He was Oga Emeka. The man whose name opened doors. The man people called when they needed something moved. The man at the front tables at industry events. The same people who had ignored him when he was struggling now sent greetings through mutual contacts. The same relatives who had expressed doubts about the marriage now came to visit with gifts. And through all of it, Ngozi smiled, because in her heart she believed one thing. We built this together. We suffered together. We will enjoy together. She did not know that success had already started changing the man she had married. She did not know it because the change was slow. And she had been taught to be patient. At first, the changes were so small they were easy to explain away. He started coming home later. Business meetings, she told herself. He began guarding his phone. Clients can be sensitive about communication, she told herself. He stopped eating dinner with her. He is tired from a long day, she told herself. He stopped asking how her day had gone. He has a lot on his mind, she told herself. For every change, there was an explanation she gave herself. Because she had been raised to give the benefit of the doubt. Because she loved him. Because marriage requires patience. Then came the temper. The man who had once said, "Baby, I will never speak to you disrespectfully, no matter what we are going through," began snapping at small things. If she asked where he had been, he looked at her like she had said something offensive. "Must I account for every hour to you?" If she expressed a concern about the household, he dismissed it. You are making a problem where there is none. If she tried to have a conversation about how distant he had become, he stood up and walked out of the room. I am not having this discussion tonight. The first time he spoke to her that way, she had been too stunned to respond, because that was not the man she married. Still she tried. She prayed, she fasted, she attended night vigils, she asked God to restore the man she had known. She sought advice from an older woman at her church who had been married for 30 years. The woman told her, "Men change when success comes. Your job is to remain stable while he finds himself again. Pray. Do not confront. Be patient." Ngozi had nodded. She had gone home and continued being patient. Then the signs became impossible to explain away. A perfume on his shirt that was not hers. Late-night calls he answered in another room. A name saved under an unfamiliar label in his phone that she saw briefly before he took it from her sight. Receipts from restaurants she had never been to. A coldness in his eyes when he looked at her that had not been there in year 1, or year 2, or even year 5. He no longer looked at her with warmth. He no longer spoke to her like a partner. He spoke to her like an employee he was tolerating. Useful, present, but unimportant, and because Ngozi was a mother by this point, because she had 2 children watching her, because she still hoped that the man she had believed in was somewhere inside the person standing in front of her. She endured. She protected the peace of the house. She smiled at school events. She hosted his business guests with warmth. She attended family gatherings and answered the questions about how they were doing. We are fine, thank God. Even when she was not fine. Even when her chest ached with a loneliness she could not name. Even when she woke at 3 a.m. and lay in the dark beside a man who was already somewhere else in every way that mattered, she told herself. This is marriage. This is what endurance looks like. This is temporary. He will come back. By year 9, her mother came to visit for 2 weeks. On the last day, her mother held both her hands and looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then she said, Ngozi, where have you gone? Ngozi had smiled. The smile she had perfected. The one that said everything is fine. She said, I am right here, Mama. Her mother had not looked convinced. She opened her mouth as if to say something more. Then she closed it, because some mothers understand that certain truths can only be heard when the daughter is ready. And Ngozi was not ready. Not yet. After her mother left, the house felt emptier than usual. Ngozi sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She thought about her mother's question. Where have you gone? She looked around the kitchen she had designed, the house she had helped build, the life that from the outside looked like success, and she asked herself honestly, where have I gone? She did not have an answer, so she got up, she started preparing dinner, and she filed the question somewhere small inside herself. The way she had filed everything difficult, quietly, without ceremony. By year 10, 2 things happened that Ngozi would later understand were connected. The first was that Emeka received his largest government contract to date, more money than he had seen at one time in his entire career. He bought a new car. He hired more staff. He moved the company to a larger office. He began appearing at events where very important people were. His posture changed. The way he entered rooms changed. The way he shook hands changed. The way he talked about himself changed. And the way he looked at Ngozi changed most of all. Not with unkindness exactly, with the specific indifference of a man who has decided that a chapter of his life belongs in the past. The second thing was that Emeka stopped hiding. He had been careful before. Hiding the phone, changing his story, covering his tracks. Now he did not bother. He would receive calls at the dinner table and simply stand up and walk to another room without explanation. He would come home at midnight, and when Ngozi asked where he had been, he would look at her with such complete contempt that she stopped asking, because the answer was always another version of the same thing. The unspoken thing. The thing she had known for at least 2 years but had refused to name. He was building a life somewhere else while living in the same house. Ngozi stopped asking questions, because asking was worse than not knowing. Because the look on his face when she asked reminded her of just how far she had fallen in his estimation. And she still had children in this house. She still had a life she had built with her own hands. She was not ready to blow it apart with questions she already knew the answers to. Not yet. It happened on a Thursday. Not a special day. Not an anniversary. Not a day that had carried any warning. Just a Thursday. Emeka came home at 7 in the evening, which was earlier than usual. He sat at the dinner table. He ate in silence. Then he set down his fork. He looked at Ngozi across the table, and he said, "I have been thinking." Ngozi set down her own fork. She looked at him and waited. Something in his tone had made the air in the room change. He said, "I want you to move to the boys' quarters." She heard the words. She understood the words individually, but for a moment she stayed completely still because she wanted to make certain she had understood the sentence correctly. She said, "What did you say?" He said, "I need the main bedroom. I am bringing someone to live here." Ngozi felt the table between them become the longest distance she had ever tried to cross. She said, "Someone." He said, "Her name is Vivian. She will be moving in next month. I want the house to be comfortable for her." Ngozi looked at her husband, this man she had carried for 12 years, this man she had made small for, this man she had protected, defended, sacrificed for, prayed for, stayed for. She said, "And where am I in this arrangement?" He said, "You are still my wife. You can stay in the boys' quarters while we figure out the next steps." Boys' quarters. The place where the house staff slept. After 12 years, after the loans she had signed in her own name, after the nights she had sat beside him going through accounts, after the clients she had entertained, after the children she had raised largely alone because he was always somewhere else. Boys' quarters. She looked at her food. She looked at the table. She looked at the man sitting across from it. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not anger. Anger had been available to her for years and she had not used it, not grief. Grief had been her companion for at least 3 years. Something quieter than both. Something that had been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment. Clarity. The full, complete, undeniable clarity of a woman who has finally run out of reasons to explain away what she already knew. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She did not ask why. She simply looked at him. And she said, "Okay," just like that. "Okay." Emeka blinked. He had prepared himself for tears. He had prepared himself for shouting. He had prepared himself for the loud version of grief that he had been expecting and perhaps even wanting so he could dismiss it. He had not prepared himself for. "Okay," he said. "Good. I am glad you understand." Ngozi nodded. She cleared the table. She washed the dishes. She checked on the children. She went to bed. And while Emeka slept beside her, already sleeping the sleep of a man who thought he had won, Ngozi lay awake, not crying, not planning, just finally, for the first time in 12 years, being completely honest with herself. She did not sleep that night. She went to her children's room. Her daughter Adaeze was 10 years old, sharp, quiet, the kind of child who notices everything and says very little. Her son, Chidi, was 7, still young enough to believe that everything would be fine as long as his mother was in the room. Ngozi sat on the floor between their beds. She watched them breathe. Adaeze was 10, old enough to have sensed that something was wrong in this house for a long time. Chidi was 7, still young enough to be protected. Ngozi looked at her daughter's face in the dark. She thought about what kind of woman Adaeze was watching her become. A woman who endures. A woman who adjusts. A woman who says okay when she should say no. A woman who makes herself invisible in her own home. Is that what she wanted her daughter to learn? That question sat in her chest like a stone. Then Adaeze stirred. She opened her eyes and saw her mother on the floor. She did not look surprised, which itself broke something in Ngozi, because it meant her daughter was used to finding her sitting quietly in the dark. Adaeze said, "Mama," Ngozi said, "Go back to sleep, my love." Adaeze sat up. She looked at her mother carefully. The way children look at you when they have been watching you for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "Are you okay?" Ngozi looked at her daughter, 10 years old, asking the question that nobody else had thought to ask directly in years. She said, "I will be." Adaeze lay back down, but she kept her eyes on her mother for a few minutes before they closed, and Ngozi sat in the dark beside her children. And she made herself a promise that whatever happened next, she would not let her daughter grow up believing that the way her mother had been treated was normal. That was the moment the okay stopped being surrender and became strategy. The next morning, Ngozi woke at 5 a.m. as she always did. She made breakfast, as she always did. She got the children ready for school, as she always did. She spoke to the house help about the day's tasks, as she always did. Emeka came downstairs. He looked at her for a moment, slightly uncertain, as if her calmness confused him. He expected something different this morning. Her eyes to be red, her voice to carry the residue of the previous night. But her eyes were clear. Her voice was steady. She handed him his breakfast and turned back to the kitchen. He stood there for a moment. Then he took his breakfast and left for work. The moment his car pulled out of the gate, Ngozi put down the cloth she was holding. She picked up her phone. She scrolled to a name she had not called in 4 years. Her lawyer. A woman named Adaeze, not her daughter, her lawyer. A woman she had known before Emeka, before the adjustments, before the silence. This woman had told her something years ago that Ngozi had not been ready to hear. She had said, "When you are ready, call me, whatever is happening. Whenever you decide you have had enough, call me." Ngozi dialed the number. It rang twice. The lawyer answered. Ngozi said, "Adaeze, it is Ngozi. I am ready." The lawyer's name was Adaeze Okonkwo. She had her own office in Victoria Island. Clean, professional. The kind of space that said this woman has handled things like this before and is not surprised by anything. When Ngozi arrived the following morning, Adaeze stood to greet her. She did not ask how she was the way people ask when they do not really want to know. She simply said, "Sit down, tell me everything." And for the first time in 12 years, Ngozi told the full truth. Not the polished version, not the version that protected Emeka's image, not the version she had been telling people at church and at family gatherings. The full truth. She told her about the loan she had taken in her own name for his truck. She told her about the savings she had contributed without asking for recognition. She told her about the contracts she had helped him manage in the early years when he did not yet have a team. She told her about the 12 years of silence, the 12 years of adjusting, the 12 years of waking up at 5 a.m., the 12 years of saying we are fine, thank God, to people who would never know otherwise. And she told her about the Thursday, about the boys' quarters, about Vivian, about the okay. Adaeze listened without interrupting. She took notes, she asked precise questions. When Ngozi finished speaking, Adaeze set down her pen. She looked at Ngozi directly. And she said, "Ngozi, I need you to understand something. What you built in this marriage does not belong only to him. What is built inside a marriage belongs to the marriage. And you have been inside this marriage for 12 years. Every pot of food, every early morning, every loan signed in your name. Every client you hosted, every event you attended and smiled through. Every sacrifice nobody saw. None of that was nothing. All of it is documented somewhere. Not in a file, in the law. And we are going to use the law." Ngozi stared at her. For the first time in a very long time, she felt something she had almost forgotten the texture of. Weight. Not the weight of carrying something, the weight of being seen, the weight of 12 years finally being counted. 3 months later, Emeka received an envelope. Not a phone call, not a confrontation, not tears or shouting or any version of the grief he had expected when he told her about Vivian. An envelope, delivered to his office, by a process server. He looked at it for a moment before opening it. He did not know why his hands felt cold. Then he opened it. Inside were documents, legal, precise, comprehensive, every asset acquired during the marriage listed carefully. The house, the property investments, the company assets that had been built during the period of the marriage, the accounts, everything they had built, or more accurately, everything she had helped him build while he had been deciding she was no longer what he needed. Emeka called her immediately. She answered on the 3rd ring. He said, "Ngozi, what is this?" She said, "You know what it is." He said, "We can talk about this. We do not need lawyers." She said, "We are talking about it through the documents." He said, "This is not necessary. We are still married." She said, "You asked me to move to the boys' quarters. I took you seriously." The call ended. The case took 8 months. During those 8 months, Emeka tried everything he could think of. He sent his mother to speak with Ngozi. His mother arrived with a container of food and a long speech about the importance of keeping a home together. Ngozi offered her tea. She listened respectfully. She thanked her for coming. She did not change her mind. He sent a pastor from their church, a man both of them had known for years. The pastor spoke about forgiveness, about the sacredness of marriage, about the children. Ngozi respected the pastor. She listened carefully. She asked for prayer before he left. She did not change her mind. He sent 3 different mutual friends at 3 different times. Each one came with a version of the same message. That she was being unreasonable. That she was throwing away 12 years. That she should consider the bigger picture. Ngozi was polite to every single one of them. She offered them water. She did not change her mind. Then Emeka came himself. Once, late on a Tuesday night, he stood in the compound of the house where she was now living alone with the children. He looked up at the lit window. Ngozi looked down at him from the window. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. He said, "I made a mistake." She said nothing. He said, "I will end things with Vivian. I will come back properly." She said nothing. His voice became quieter. He said, "Please, just come back." Ngozi looked at him for a moment longer. Then she reached out and drew the curtain closed. Not in anger, not in triumph, in completion. Because there are some doors that once properly closed cannot be reopened by the same person who walked away from them. That is not bitterness. That is the simple truth of what certain choices cost. The settlement was fair, not generous, not punishing, fair. Which was all Ngozi had ever asked for. Not revenge, not his complete destruction. Just fairness. Just the acknowledgement that 12 years of an invisible woman's work was worth something. That the loan she had signed in her own name was worth something. That the savings she had contributed were worth something. That the children she had largely raised were worth something. That the silence she had endured had not been free. Her lawyer Adaezes was precise and thorough, and completely unbothered by Emeka's lawyers attempting to minimize everything. She had the receipts, she had the bank records, she had dates and figures and documented evidence of every contribution Ngozi had made. She presented them calmly, like someone who has been waiting to do exactly this for a very long time. When it was over, Ngozi signed her name. Her hand was steady. She did not cry. She had cried enough. Now she was building. 2 years after that Thursday, Ngozi moved into her own apartment. Small, simple, every piece of furniture chosen by her. Not because she could not afford something larger, but because she wanted to start with exactly what she needed, and nothing more. The kitchen was the first room she arranged properly. She put things where she wanted them, not where anyone else expected them. For the first time in over a decade, every item in that kitchen was in the exact right place, because she had decided where the right place was. She had a garden outside the apartment, a small one. She planted things, and they grew, because she gave them exactly what they needed, instead of adjusting herself to fit what they expected. She called her friends again, the ones she had slowly stopped calling during the years when the conversations had become too complicated. Some of them were still there, waiting, without complaint, without making her feel guilty about the distance. The way real friends wait. She laughed again, the original laugh, too loud at things that were genuinely funny. The laugh she had measured and contained for so many years that she had forgotten what it actually sounded like. It came back, slowly at first, then all at once. One morning she sat in her garden with a cup of coffee. The sun was on her face. The children were inside still sleeping. The house was quiet in a way that was peaceful rather than empty. And she sat there and thought, not about Emeka, not about the 12 years, but about the Thursday. About the word, okay, that had started everything. And she said to herself quietly, "Thank you for finally being honest. It only took 12 years. But you got there." Emeka's life did not fall apart dramatically. That is not usually how these things happen. It fell apart slowly, the way things that have been built on the wrong foundation always eventually do. The business began losing contracts. Not immediately, but the government connections that had driven his growth had been partly sustained by Ngozi's quiet networking. The clients she had charmed at the dinner parties she had organized, the relationships she had maintained with careful attention. When she left, those things left with her. Not because she took them deliberately, because they had been built on her labor and her presence. And she was no longer present. Vivian moved into the house. She was not what Emeka had imagined she would be. The freedom of the situation without Ngozi to quietly manage everything revealed itself quickly as weight rather than liberation. The house required managing. The children required managing when they visited. The business required managing. And Vivian was not Ngozi. She had not been trained in the quiet art of holding everything together while making it look effortless. Within 18 months, the relationship with Vivian had become tense. Within 2 years, it had ended. Emeka found himself in the house alone, with the business declining, with the children who had chosen to stay primarily with their mother, with the reputation that had quietly shifted because people had talked. People always talk. And the story of the man who asked his wife of 12 years to move to the boys' quarters had made the rounds. In the circles that mattered, he tried to rebuild. He made calls. Some people answered, some people did not. The ones who did not answer were often the ones who had known Ngozi, who had watched her smile through years of pain, who had decided quietly and without announcement that certain kinds of behavior had a cost. Emeka was not destroyed, but he was diminished. And he knew why. And knowing why was perhaps the hardest part. Some women are taught that endurance is the highest form of love, that staying is strength, that silence is grace, and sometimes it is. But there is a difference between endurance and disappearance, between patience and erasure, between staying because you are choosing to, and staying because you have forgotten that leaving is an option. Ngozi endured for 12 years, not because she was weak, because she believed. And when the belief finally ran out, what was left was not bitterness, it was clarity. And clarity is the most dangerous thing a woman who has been invisible can discover. Because once she sees herself clearly, she cannot be made invisible again. If you know a woman who has been making herself smaller in her own home, who has been saying we are fine, thank God, when she is not fine, who has been waking up at 5 a.m. for someone who stopped noticing, send this to her today. Not tomorrow. Today. Let her know that her worth was never determined by how much she endured. It was always already there, waiting for her to remember it. May every woman who has cried in silence find her voice. May every sacrifice that went unseen be remembered by heaven. May every woman who has stayed too long out of love find the clarity to know when staying has become disappearing. May those who built others from nothing be restored completely. May the God who sees what no one else sees repay every hidden sacrifice with open reward. And may every woman watching this know that her worth was never negotiable. It was never for anyone else to determine. It was always, entirely, hers. Like and subscribe for more African tales every week on Folktale Globe. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done if you were Ngozi on that Thursday? I want to hear from you.